In dimensions, there are literally only 7 that are experienceable in this matrix, Meredith. Dimensions. Dimensions are extensions, which allow measurement. The first dimension is 1 extension, the second is 2, and so on and so forth. Every time we go up 1 dimension, we are extending all of the previous dimensions outward in 2 brand new directions, perpendicular to the directions available before. All of the information from the previous dimensions becomes just a snapshot in this new dimension. I invite you to visualize these dimensions by extending them in your mind as we talk about each one. We'll bring along a cat with us starting in the 3rd dimension to help us digest the mind-bending concepts of higher dimensionality. Before we dive in, here is a 1-sentence overview. The first 3 dimensions make up space. The next 3 make up time. The 7th is the universe in relation to other universes, and the 0th is consciousness. The dimensions. Starting at the bottom, we have dimension 0, perspective. A point has no dimensionality, only position. This is relevant because a point is also a point of conscious perspective, creating an infinite link between all dimensionality, where the creator can perceive itself as it's doing now through your eyes, ears, and mind. Zero dimensionality is the center point of the torus shape, a concept we will explore further in the densities lesson. This center unity is the link to all fractal consciousness, and also what enables consciousness to be here in the physical world. First dimension, length. In the first dimension, we have a line, 1 extension, 2 directions. This extension we call length. Second dimension, height, planes. As we go to the second dimension, the line extends to have height. Now we have an area and are able to create all of the 2D shapes, like squares, triangles, all that fun stuff. Third dimension, depth, objects, entities. As we move to the 3rd dimension, we can add depth. Now we can make a cube, a sphere, a tetrahedron, or a cat. Let's call our cat Chessie and bring him along with us through the dimensions. 4th dimension, time, timelines. If we want Chessie to chase a mouse, we need to extend our 3D world into the 4th dimension, time. Time can be thought of as events that our 3D world goes through. Events are snapshots on a 4D timeline. When we reference 2 or more events, we are now in the 4th dimension. Strings of events extend in both directions, future and past, to create a timeline. We can understand a 4th dimensional being by looking at their entire timeline from the beginning to the end. For example, the entire life of our cat Chessie. We can assign an X value, let's call it time X, to how many events that Chessie has experienced, starting at 0 when Chessie became incarnate. We can look at any event in Chessie's life, each event being a 3D snapshot, by specifying how far along the timeline the event took place, or simply put, how old Chessie was. 5th dimension, time planes. In the 5th dimension, timelines are extended in another direction, just like how we went from a 1D line to a 2D area. Now we have an infinite number of timelines beside each other, just like infinite parallel lines on a 2D plane. Each of these timelines may have a different past and future, though they may also converge and diverge, and even crisscross, with the most splitting and merging occurring at points of high energy. The closest timelines represent very similar strings of events. Maybe we wore a different shirt, but otherwise lived the same life. As we get further and further, the changes become much greater. Maybe we moved to a different city, met different people, but became a different person. Instead of just moving back and forth along timelines from past to future, we can now move side to side to different timelines in the present, or diagonally to timelines in the future or the past. Returning to our cat Chessie, we still have the time X value of how old Chessie is, and now we also have a time Y value which represents which timeline this particular Chessie's events exist on. Or, if you fancy some Schrodinger, which Chessie is in the litter box. Sixth dimension, time entities, time objects. Remember when we went from 2D to 3D, from a plane capable of only shapes to a world with depth that could hold an entity like a cat? When we extend our parallel versions of timelines to have depth, we get the sixth dimension. And it's just as big of a leap as we took to get from the third dimension from 2D. In 6D, we have time-filling objects and entities within time. Just like in 3D, we had space-filling objects and entities within space. To simplify this concept, I will call the 6D entities time shapes. But remember, they are similar to a 3D object, but with time instead of space, and they can be intelligent, like our cat Chessie. Similar to how we need practically infinite layers to make a sphere from circles, we also need practically infinite layers of timelines to make a 6D time shape. To grasp this concept, let's imagine that we have our cat Chessie that exists on multiple timelines. On one of these timelines, Chessie escapes through a closing door and runs free, where he fathers a litter of kitties with another cat. On our other timeline, the door closes faster, and Chessie stays inside and fathers no kitties. Now, both of these timelines can be expressed within the fifth dimension from the perspective of Chessie, though in reality, whole layers of other timelines are getting involved. For example, what about Chessie's owner's timeline? What about the kittens? What about everything in the world that interacts with Chessie and all of his kittens? Just like the second dimension isn't really experienceable in the third dimensional space-time, the fifth dimensional flat timelines aren't really experienceable in the sixth dimensional time-space. They're more like a way to look at the components of time entities, like a planar circle is a component of a sphere. If we jump fifth dimensionally to a different timeline, the rest of reality has to snap around us to fit that. And the elastic time-space fabric that makes this snap is sixth dimensional. Back to our furry friends. Let's imagine all of the interactions that our kittens will have. They will all get adopted and go to loving homes and become connected, influencing all of the timelines they interact with. All of the interactions become a tree-like shape of weaved timelines. This is a time shape, a shape that has bounds in time instead of space. The shape has a beginning and end in time, just like a 3D object does in space. These time shapes are basically bounds of reality formation, where every event within the bounds is entangled. Let's visualize this another way. Imagine the entire history of Earth, from coagulating dust to being swallowed by the sun. Watch all of the movement on the planet in super speed, like a buzz, from all of the plant and animal life to humans and beyond. Now superimpose all possible timelines on top of this visualization. If we take a step back and try to imagine all of these timelines, we see that we start off all together, one rock. Then we balloon out into an incredible amount of energy and timelines, and finally, we return to a single possible end of the sun swallowing the Earth. You just visualized a 6D time shape, one that contains literally every possibility for Earth. In that time shape, every single possible reality for every conscious entity exists, and not just as a possibility, but as an experience that arises from perspective, collectively creating the sixth-dimensional entity, Gaia. If you're thinking, wait, isn't everything entangled since the Big Bang? You are completely correct. Every possibility for our universe is existing together as one now, and it's the biggest time shape we know. Seventh dimension, universal time shape. The sixth dimension gave us time shapes. So what are time shapes a snapshot of? Let's back up. You may have noticed that in our model, the progression of dimensions 4, 5, and 6 were a lot like 1, 2, and 3, but with time instead of space. So when we jump from the sixth to the seventh dimension, it should be similar to when we jumped from the third dimension to the fourth. In that jump, we went from a universe of space-time, or space at one time, to a universe of time-space, or time at one space. The structure of space became malleable through time, and time became malleable through space. So what happens when we go beyond time? When we go beyond time, we go outside of our time-space, space-time itself, and our entire universal time shape becomes just one snapshot. Moving through the seventh dimension, we have different expressions of time and space, which are separate universes. In these other universes, the properties of time can be different, as can the properties of physical matter, if it exists at all in a given universe. An infinite range of possibilities exists. We are just stopping at 7 because that's when we enter the multiverse. But since we're here, let's go all the way. Imagine that the next 3 dimensions, 7, 8, and 9, make up another 3-axis system. Past space, further than time, we have this other plane of existence, this time of realities. The 7th, 8th, and 9th dimensions together hold all possible realities, and the 10th dimension is all of this together in one point. You now understand the structure of our universe. In the next lesson, we will talk about the layers of consciousness that inhabit this structure. But first, I want to say one more thing. While there are infinite timelines in theory, in practice there is a smaller but still huge collection of highly probable timelines. Rivers of time flow, bringing timelines together. This is the way. And this way is forged by collective attention. Our attention makes our way, and together with all consciousness on this planet, we make the way for Gaia. Together, by focusing our love, we can steer our version of Gaia onto a timeline of harmony and incredible abundance and collective consciousness. And we are not alone. So many others are already doing this and have been doing it for thousands of years. I'm happy to be here to remind you of this simple fact. And if it's your desire, welcome you to join us by focusing your attention on loving connection. With each loving light, the path gets brighter for all. Before we move on, let's do a quick review. We have a 3-axis representation of space, dimensions 1, 2, and 3. We also have a 3-axis representation of time, dimensions 4, 5, and 6. The only finished dimensions that can fully explain a reality are the 3rd and the 6th dimensions. This is because they contain all of the axes needed to express either space or time fully. Finally, the 7th dimension makes our entire universe just one snapshot, one point on an infinite line of other universes. This model we just went over is our interpretation of the 10-dimensional model accepted by many scientists today. You are now ready to dive into the densities of consciousness, the final fundamental component of our model. And when you do, keep in mind that everything you have learned here will help you tremendously in your understanding and visualizing of densities.